Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome back to my favourite time of the week. And as part of the Inspiring Leadership series, I am very fortunate to have Guy Waits. Guy is a Clipper skipper. He is the skipper of the Round the World race. It was 2019 to 2020. Currently, it's in suspension because of the global pandemic, but he is a phenomenal guy. And when it's ready to start again, which we hope in February 2021, he'll be back with his team of 60, going on the rest of the legs. He's also going to be taking part in the global Golden Globe, that's a tongue twister here, single-handed round the world race in 2022. Phenomenal guy, done many different things. Over to you, Guy. Great to have you on the program.
Good afternoon, Jonathan. Nice to be here. Thank you.
And do tell us a bit about your sort of vocation, jobs, and vocation again. I found that a very interesting conversation when we chatted.
Yeah. So, life started for me at a very early age in terms of a working career and very much of a vocation as a professional photographer. And working self-employed, so working as often as a team of one, but going into a lot of corporates, large corporates, national, international, shooting pictures for them. Saw a bit of a fly on the wall view of how businesses work, and often leaving those businesses glad that I was following a vocation and not such a high-powered career as many people choose. And then I moved into Royal Mail for several years as a delivery line manager, and saw an awful lot of what I didn't want to see. It was quite ironic that I found myself moving from a vocation for many years, becoming slightly disillusioned with photography in the move with technology into digital, and then actually working basically in a job, which I never thought I would do. I thought photography was my whole life. And then after several years of Royal Mail, realizing that really was not for me, and I needed to go back to a vocational-based life. And that's when sailing came in. After all those years of sailing, I'm now, as you say, a skipper in the Clipper Around the World race.
Yeah, and leadership is the theme here, inspiring leadership. And you were recommended to us by Lieutenant General James Bashall, an old friend
Yes.
who's appeared on this series twice, because he has some very insightful things to share. But he said, you need to get Guy Waits on the series. He's got some amazing stories. I mean, you sailed single-handedly 4 times across the Atlantic. You've achieved some amazing things in your life, and yet you're still humble. And I really admire that about you. That's part of the theme of
Thank you.
You are inspiring.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. What have been some of the people who've inspired you, and from childhood, if you pick a couple of people, childhood and now today, who inspires you?
Well, it's interesting because the people who've always inspired me in life have been the lone adventurers, from the astronauts to the mountaineers to the sailors. And when you think about sailing and solo sailing, you have to think of Sir Robin Knox-Johnston. So there's an interesting circle of events there. That Sir Robin was the first person to sail single-handed non-stop around the world. A challenge that back then we were just about putting man on the moon at that time in history, and here he was doing something that people thought could not be done. He thought a person would go crazy if they spent that much time on their own in that much isolation. And he's now the founder of the Clipper Around the World race, and I'm one of his skippers. Looking forward to the Golden Globe race myself in 2 years' time. So there's an interesting story there.
Yeah, and tell people who are listening, some of them may not know the phenomenal effort that's involved in the Clipper Around the World race. I mean, you as a skipper have a team of 60, and just give us an indication of just what a challenge it is. And these men and women who come from different jobs around the world, giving up their day job for a period of time to do a really huge challenge and ordeal. Scary. Sometimes people die or get injured, or it's a real big challenge, isn't it? Just tell us a bit about it, because some won't know about it.
It's a huge challenge. First of all, the Dare to Lead team consists of just over 60 individuals from 14 different nationalities, We've got an age range of 18 to 74, I think is the oldest crew member. And they come from all sorts of backgrounds, very incredibly interesting and often very successful group of individuals who are looking for something just a little bit different in life. And they certainly get it with the Clipper Around the World race. To be fair to them and not to be unkind in any way, some of them are actually experienced sailors, but none of them have ever gone across an ocean. So they really don't know what they're letting themselves in for, not truly. And it's a massive challenge. It's a challenge even for me, let alone for them with little or no experience at all of sailing. But we give them the training that they need. And we take, as I say, 60 people and put them into a team of 20 people on the boat. So we have people getting on and off the boat all the way around the world. And setting goals and behaviors to achieve those goals. You know, what do we really want out of this race as a team is actually one of the fundamentals, and I think has led to Dare to Lead's success so far.
Yeah, and it's always very interesting to me. I've known a number of people who've done it. My father was a naval officer and loved sailing, and I've done a bit of sailing. I was lucky enough as a young boy to go up to Cape Wrath with John Ridgway. And wow. He took us out on one of his huge tall ships right out at Cape Wrath. It was scary as hell. Yeah. I was a young lad, 14 or something, strapped in on some line as we were all like this in some storm.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was a great experience, and I have huge admiration for you, firstly as the leader, as the skipper, but also for the different types of men and women who decide to do it. And if people are listening to this and thinking of taking on such an enormous challenge, and I had a guy the other day who's done ultra marathons and Ironman, and he's one of 4 world record holders who ran, I think is it 79 miles from the Marble Arch to Dover, then swam the 21 miles without a wetsuit across the English Channel, and then cycled 181 miles to the Arc de Triomphe, only getting knocked off his bike a mile from the end, but he got back on again and finished it. But that takes phenomenal skills. But the men and women who you've got, if you were thinking of the kind of person that makes a good team member of your boat, what qualities would make those inspiring team members?
They have to be enormously understanding of the people around them, particularly at sea, in what is a very closed, confined, no way out environment. Although the yachts are 70 feet long, 70 feet is not a lot of space for 20 people to live together. And so, as I say, the goals and behaviors that we discussed even before we even sailed together were fundamental to the team keeping together, because we all agreed and all had a set of goals that we were all aiming for. And in actual fact, as the leader of Dare to Lead, and I'm rather reluctant to take that title, my goals for the race are actually probably at the bottom of the pile. It was very much more about the team and not at all about me. So I think humility and understanding and careful management with shared goals, and anyone can achieve it. If they put their mind to it, anyone can achieve it.
It's ordinary people achieving extraordinary results. And I think it's really interesting, your time as a photographer, going into these big businesses and looking at the good companies and going, they get this right. There's something you could probably feel it, fingertip.
Yes, yeah.
With a really good company, and how people work together well, and they were respectful, and there was equality and a sense of encouragement for each other. And then some toxic organizations you went into where you would go, I do not want to work it. Thank goodness I don't have to work in a corporation. Probably the same in a team. When you get a group of people together,
very much so.
Really bad experiences. So do you want to just talk about, firstly, whether it's the ones, firstly, the ones you visited? I was interested as a photographer. What did you see with the really toxic ones? What were you picking up that made it so bad?
Well, in actual fact, I ended up working for such an organization, and it's invariably the older establishments where you have a strong manual workforce, and you have this huge divide between the people who do the work and the people who manage them. And those are the businesses that are most difficult to work in, I think, and also the most difficult to change.
Yeah,
it's a huge problem to change a company that is very large in its organization, very set in its ways, not just to modernize, but to actually change the perception that the two groups have of one another.
yeah.
And how anything you can do to bring them together is a step in the right direction.
And don't you think, I'm picking up that in this global pandemic, many companies have had to completely reset their mindset, and what has taken years before had to happen overnight. Like, you can't work from home. You can't. You're just skiving. You're missing off. Then suddenly tomorrow you're working from home, and you may work from home for the next 2 years. What?
Yes.
Okay. And then you've got people like British Airways, who are good in some ways, but also heavily unionized and restricted practices and all that kind of stuff. Suddenly they're having new contracts, and everybody's on a new contract. They don't like it. Fine, go. And I think actually there's many bad things about the pandemic, including the tragic deaths and illnesses of so many.
Yes, of course.
I've known a number who've been ill. But there may be a brighter side where some of these moribund old organizations with really sort of standardized, jobs worth attitude and them and us may have to break down. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And the out of everything bad comes something good, doesn't it? And no one would wish a pandemic on anyone. But I don't doubt for a moment that they will see some huge changes in the way organizations work. We're seeing it already. My own wife works from home, and now very much works from home with meetings, online meetings and webinars. And it will undoubtedly change the way businesses work. And I hope for the better.
Yeah.
I hope for the better, for sure.
Yeah. And you met Julie when you were both at Royal Mail, and also you have a sailing theme. Do you want to say how you met? This is your first anniversary around now. So congratulations on being married for a year. So tell us a bit about the two of you.
Okay, so Julie and I met sailing a few years ago now. It was our first wedding anniversary on Monday, but we met a few years ago, and it was because of sailing. Julie was training at the time as a crew member for the previous Clipper race, the 2017-18 Clipper race, as a crew member aboard the Great Britain boat, and sailing in leg 8, which is back from New York across the Atlantic to the finish as it was that year in Liverpool. And she came to the local sailing club, Scarborough Yacht Club, where I was sailing myself, and that's how we got.
I was born in Scarborough. Scarborough, my hometown.
There you are. Happy coincidence. Yeah. So that's how we met, and we met through sailing. And at the time, I was preparing a small boat to sail single-handed across the Atlantic for the third time. And when I returned across the Atlantic in the same boat on the fourth occasion across the Atlantic, that's when we became an item. And a year later, we married. And it was on the build-up to our marriage that, and I was working for Royal Mail at the time as a manager. Julie could sense that I needed to find a new career. It was time to go, as we said, back to a vocation from a job, and that's when she supported me enormously and put me into the Clipper world, because the Clipper changed. I became a first mate, and that led to me becoming a skipper now. So definitely my biggest supporter.
Well done, and congratulations from
Thank you.
Becoming first mate to a skipper, a clever skipper. And one of the things that does mark out these inspiring leaders is their humility and their vulnerability to admit when they got it wrong and when they don't know. Because as some people say, when a leader that everybody looks to and admires says, I don't know. And James Bashall said that on a visit when he was in, I think it was Afghanistan or Iraq. And one of the soldiers said on the note afterwards, when he'd heard him speak on the podcast, he remembers this, that he thought, well, these generals always make out they know everything. And he actually had the honesty to admit he didn't know, which allows other people to admit they don't know. And it also allows people who are more junior to say, actually, I do know, I know how to do this. Great, bring it in, come and do it. It's the mistakes that we make. And we were talking before about leg 2 of the Clipper race, 7,000 miles. when personally you probably, as a leader, didn't get it right, got it wrong, and were honest enough to reflect on that. Tell us the story, and also what you learnt from the mistake that will shape you now to be a better leader when you restart after the pandemic, when you restart the round the world race.
Okay, so it was, we'd sailed leg one of the race, which was over 6,000 nautical miles all the way down the Atlantic to Punta del Este in Uruguay, in South America. And it was now leg two, and we set out from Uruguay for Cape Town, which is about 4,000 nautical miles. We dipped into the Southern Ocean as far south as 45 degrees south. And we were doing well in the race, and the crew had bonded very well. We'd had very few crew changeovers in Punta del Este. So we had a good, strong core of a team, and I felt confident in them. And I was allowing them to sail the boat as much as possible. A sort of very much a step back role, and allowing them to experience as much as they possibly could, which was great for getting their engagement and their contribution. But then the weather turned. Okay. Now, we can expect the weather to turn in the Southern Ocean. That's exactly where we would expect it to happen. But due to one or two other circumstances, it put us in a very compromised situation with regard to our sails and our ability to sail in the bad weather. And at that point, I really should have recognized that they needed more of me alongside them and really right there with them at the sharp end, keeping the boat safe and getting to Cape Town as soon as we could. And I didn't. I hung back and allowed them to keep sailing the boat. And I think it damaged the team. Actually, it knocked their confidence. And as a result of it, the real sad part for me is that 3 members of the team actually left the race early when we arrived in Cape Town. They were supposed to sail legs 3, and 2 of them legs 3 and 4, and they actually got off early. So I was disappointed for myself, for the team, and for those individuals, because I felt if I'd really stepped in when I could have done, it might just have made the difference, and they may well have continued. And that's what I really wanted for them more than anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so open about that. And there's so many occasions I look back as a leader on things I should have done, didn't do. One leader said to me, what is it, when you're thinking about people, whether they're right or wrong, or whether the situation is right, what is it you know now about someone that you'll find out in 6 weeks' time?
Yes. And
often you, in your gut, you sort of know, but for various reasons you make a decision that turns out not to be right. But going from learning from our mistakes, the other thing which is very important in a good inspiring leader is humor. Being able to laugh at themselves, being able to laugh with their team. So the toxic teams, they all laugh at an individual and humiliate them and make them feel bad. The good teams can laugh at themselves and have a good belly laugh. So in all your sailing, particularly because there's so many leadership lessons from sailing, which is why I've got a picture of Sri Lanka behind on the beach there, which was a photograph I took recently. Tell us a couple of stories about fun times or funny times, and how you could lighten the load when it's really challenging and stressful, and have a good laugh together.
Yeah, well, keeping your sense of humor is vital, isn't it? Even in times of real difficulty, and we've certainly had plenty of those in the latest race around the world. Now, there was a time, it was my 3rd crossing of the Atlantic single-handed in a tiny little boat, only 20 feet 9 inches long, that I'd renovated myself and prepared for the voyage, and was heading across the North Atlantic to Newport, Rhode Island was the intended destination. And I'd sailed the northern route across the Atlantic via the Newfoundland Grand Banks. And as I sailed underneath the Newfoundland Grand Banks, which incidentally is the area that the Titanic was sunk by the iceberg, by the way, there was some particularly bad weather. And I was sitting in the cockpit trying to control the situation as best I could in this tiny little boat. And although it wasn't very funny at the time, it's turned into a funny story. A large wave broke behind the boat, turned us sideways and rolled us right over. And so I actually jumped out of the cockpit into the ocean for fear of being trapped underneath an upturned boat. And so there I was, laughing at myself, believe it or not, in the Atlantic Ocean, tethered to the boat, with a safety harness. but nevertheless, looking at my keel sticking up in the air and admiring the fact that there was no weed growing on it. And I must have done a good job with the anti-foul for that to be the case. Fortunately, the boat righted itself, and within moments, I was back sitting in the relative safety of the cockpit. But it's quite an interesting story. It wasn't so funny at the time, but when I reflect upon it now, it raises a few laughs with the people I have around me. So we enjoy that story.
Real admiration for you, and I think I feel a real connection with you. Not the same, but doing a lot of things single-handedly, or the endurance kind of people. Like, I've done mountain marathons and things like this,
Right.
okay, with a
Yes.
team, but often runs and endurance runs and things like this, and even doing the airborne training with James Bashall. It was you had to work as a team, but a lot of time it was a personally whether you passed or failed.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in the fact that you have had this admiration for lone adventurers who've been in self-employment, but now you're the captain of a very large team of 60, and you have to pull together this disparate group of people from 14 different languages, all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
In things that you cannot control. It's almost like you need that Stoic philosophy, accept what you can control, what you can't control. The weather is certainly one of them. There's no such thing as bad weather, there's only bad clothing, someone used to say.
Yes.
And what have you done? We talked about toxic teams. What have you done to create a really good team? What tips and advice would you give others? Because you clearly have, and James spoke very highly of you. You would not be talking with me now if he didn't think you were a very fine example of a skipper, of a leader, but someone who pulled a team together. What was it that made good teams when you've had good teams?
Right. Okay. So when I reflect back on my time that I've spent alone in these adventures that I've had, I think what I've learned about myself, okay, is actually fundamental to what you bring to a team. Okay. And when you take yourself out of the ordinary busy world with all of the distractions and essentially put yourself in isolation, you learn a terrific amount about yourself, particularly the negatives. Okay. And that's a very humbling process. And I think you bring that humility to a team of individuals. Okay. You can then see those same traits, even if they're expressed in different ways, you can see those same traits expressed in others and help them with it. Okay. And you can also, it's all part of the honesty and the ownership of not being able to do things and asking for help from the team around you, so that they feel valued and actually make a bigger input as part of the team, because they know they're doing something for you or doing something for the team that you can't do yourself. And it makes a huge difference that you've got everyone's buy-in. And if you're an old school leader where you're the person at the front and it's do as I say, not as I do, you'll lose people very quickly. When you give people ownership and responsibility, they're enthused, they're engaged. It's a perfect team environment.
Yeah, no, that rings very true for me with some of the leaders that I coached, and the good ones and the ones who have more challenging characteristics which others find more difficult.
Yes.
And it's when you have, as you say, that the know-it-alls who think they're, as the very good book Leadership is Language by Admiral David Marquet, The Submariner, which I would recommend as a good
read. Thank you.
To get on board.
Yeah.
He talks about some people have this prove mindset rather than improve, so they have to prove they are right.
Yes.
And with that prove mindset comes a be good, that you are good, and no one should challenge that you're good.
Yes.
As opposed to the mindset which comes with the improve view of life, which is get better, improve and get better, that you are the imperfect leader. And I think that's very powerful. And it sounds like when you pull together a team, you need that kind of mindset in your team of 60. When you're starting to meet people, new crew members, people who want to join, they're coming perhaps to be interviewed by you to see if they should be on board. Can you spot quite early on some characteristics in the way people speak, the way they carry themselves, that make you know this will be a good member of the team, and other attributes which you go, no, and that you probably turn people down because it came out? What would you say?
I think it's almost natural to have that opinion of people when we first meet them, that face value. And I've learned so many times that you can be so wrong in your opinion of people on first meeting them. You know, the saying, walk a mile in a person's shoes before you judge them, couldn't be more true. And for every character and for every type of person, if there is such a thing, okay, there's a role for them somewhere in the team. And if you step back and allow people to express themselves naturally, you know, to resonate to whatever role suits them, then you get the best out of them, you get the best out of the person, and you get the best output from the team as well. And so you find I talked about this when we first discussed the Dare to Lead goals and behaviors. We talked about how people naturally gravitate to their position, dependent on how confident they were, okay, or perhaps not confident, maybe even fearful, okay, and allowing people the opportunity to explore those fears in a relatively safe environment was what was actually going to develop them as a person and improve the team as a whole.
Yeah, and if it's not too awkward to say, you know, people spend a lot of money to be on the crew of one.
Yes, they do.
Can you say how much it is that people have to commit to take part, or is this something you'd rather not discuss?
No, I don't mind at all. It's if you want to go all the way around the world, it's £50,000.
Wow. Yeah.
But
if you want to do a leg, say for example,
a leg, then it's several thousands of pounds.
Yeah, but it's not a small undertaking. And do you find, you mentioned you got all sorts of people achieved lots of things in their own rights, but have you had some people from poorer backgrounds with less opportunities in life who've been given the chance to take part in it, and it's been the making of them?
Well, in actual fact, the Dare to Lead team, the very foundation of the Dare to Lead team, was based around a project in South Africa that gave opportunities to people who otherwise would have not had anything like that kind of experience in their life. And the whole purpose of it was to give them a taste of something different in the hope that they could go beyond when they return to their communities and their families and their employment, what have you. And that's very much still now the ethos behind the Dare to Lead team, that you take these individuals from so many different places in the world and individual places and spaces. And when they experience what they experience as part of working as a team in a remote environment, in very challenging circumstances, that what they grow and learn, they then take back to their families, to their communities, and to their businesses, their work projects. And it influences not just them, it touches other people that they touch in their lives.
Yeah. And what happens? They get sort of sponsorship? Does someone else back them? Or how can the poorer, less wealthy ones take part in this or get nominated?
We do have people who've managed to raise sponsorship, but they've done so on a very personal level. I know one or two people who've taken part in previous races have then thought, I'd like to sponsor someone to do this who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. In fact, the man behind Dare to Lead, Dirk himself, was a round the world crew member in one of the early races, and that's what gave him the inspiration. So, you know, what goes around. So
yeah. And I do think that endurance and challenging times, and crikey, you know, almost the round the world race epitomizes what's going on now with the global pandemic. This is unprecedented times with challenges people do not know quite how to cope with. But it's nothing like being in the middle of an ocean in a horrendous storm and your ship being thrown around, everybody being scared and stuff. So there's different qualities, but don't you think it brings to the fore both the finest qualities of human nature, as well as at times some of the most selfish aspects as people look after themselves? Do you want to just describe, you don't need to name anybody, but if you could think of characters you know, where you saw them do some really fine things at sea, and other sad occasions where individuals, through perhaps fear and whatever, were a little bit selfish.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what we were saying a moment ago with regard to, you know, not judging a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. You find some of the people that you would think would struggle the most really step up to the plate and do the work of 2 or 3 people, and other people who would have given you the impression that they were very confident and capable, successful people, capable of meeting challenge, were actually found themselves actually in a very dark, scared place. And the wonderful thing about the ocean, okay, is that it's a great leveler of people.
Yeah.
And it really finds you out. If you've got any dark corners, you know, it really drills into them. And as I say, it levels the playing field enormously. And that was one of the wonderful things we've seen, because as I say, with 60 plus people from all these different backgrounds, and some of these people are incredibly successful achievers in life. And one of the things I found very humbling myself is that these people are looking to me for leadership and guidance in these situations. And that's a great honor, actually.
Courage and humility, and discipline, 3
yes.
very important. You remind me of recently I saw my friend Will Swinton posted up some images of the Scots Guards on Mount Tumbledown in the 1982 Falklands War.
Yes.
And I was privileged enough to serve with the Scots Guards in 84 to 86 as a platoon commander on attachment from the Royal Signals. And I talked to my platoon, those who'd been to the war, and they said it was surprising that some of the rogues, some of the people that everybody was dismissive of in peacetime, because they were always in trouble or in the guard room getting locked up for doing something. When we were on the hill, the mountain, in a blizzard of snow at night, in there, you know, it was June, so it was the, you know, Falklands winter.
The depths of their winter, yes.
Yeah. Going up against the 5th Marine Battalion, who were well trained, and people were dying and getting shot and killed, and some were scared and hiding behind rocks. It was surprising, as you say, walking a mile in someone else's shoes. You don't know how they'll behave, but the rogues turned out to be really good in a fight and
yes.
in a tough time. And there were 1 or 2 of the rather pompous officers who were not so fine and hid behind the rocks and have challenged people who've called them out since then, because they tried to tell a good story of how brave they were, when actually the guardsmen, the private soldiers, knew who was brave and who was a coward. Now, saying he's a coward is a bit strong of them to say that. They just perhaps didn't understand that person was maybe a 19-year-old platoon commander and was very scared by what was going on. But some other people were very fine in what they did, and you never expect it. So again, time and again, I have to relearn 2 things. One is not to be judgmental about other people, because I haven't walked in their shoes and I don't know their life.
Yes.
Who am I to judge anybody else with all my faults? God, I've got a mile of those. And then the other one is non-attachment. We get caught up with attachment to stuff and things and possessions.
Yes.
When you're out in the middle of a storm on an ocean on your little tiny boat around the world, you've got nothing really with you, a few items, and you could lose all that.
Absolutely.
And you can't be attached to anything. The only thing you were attached to was a rope attaching you to your tiny boat, but you could lose all that as well.
Yes.
What did that teach you about a really healthy philosophy to life, about taking things in perspective and what does matter and what doesn't matter?
Oh, very much living life in the moment, of course. Something we haven't discussed, I did when I was towards the end of my photographic career, when I realized that the thing that I thought I would do for my whole life was coming to an end. And that was a very dark period in my life, because I suddenly realized that actually I didn't know what I wanted to do anymore. I practiced an awful lot of yoga, and I found that incredibly helpful, that quiet time by myself. So it is enormously difficult for people in testing times, and you've just got to live in the moment and take each day and each moment as it comes, and it really puts the noise of life into perspective, being out in the ocean.
Yeah.
Because you have to respond all the time to the weather, a thing over which you have no control whatsoever. So life is continually changing, and yet you work in so many large corporates where change is the hardest thing of all. And that's where this pandemic will make a huge difference to businesses. because the change has been forced upon them. And a lot of good will come from it. But if you live in the moment, you can see through it, because you know nothing lasts forever. And just like the weather, it'll change.
And also, I have a chain here, and we can't see it, but it says "Memento Mori," remember you're mortal, and that you could lead life right now. My father was a naval officer killed when he was only 35.
Yes,
he didn't see that coming. He thought he had a full life. So I think it's a constant battle for me to be in the moment and be present. And I tend to practice with I tend to have funny enough a 30-minute power nap during the day, which I just had one day before we were on. But also I do mindfulness as well, a bit of meditation, and when I can, a couple of times a week, some yoga. And like you, I find that very healthy. What else do you find? I mean, James described you as very fit and healthy. You have to be.
I need to have a word with James Bashall, I think.
what do you do to keep fit and healthy, and how do you manage your mental state? Because here you are. Your job is to be a clipper skipper, but the pandemic stopped that. You're having to wait until you can skip again. How are you managing your mental health now at home, and how are you keeping fit, and what are you doing to be in the moment, to be present?
Well, first of all, to be in isolation at home is nothing particularly challenging for me. It was my longest trip across the Atlantic single-handed was 55 days in a tiny little boat that you couldn't stand up in. So it's kind of like a solitary confinement in a way, but a self-imposed one. Whereas this one has been imposed upon us, hasn't it? And I think that's the biggest challenge for most people, is that it's not of their choice. It's been forced upon them. And but for me, it's not difficult at all. And just knowing that, actually relinquishing control, if you like, letting go of the idea that you're in charge of your life and just allowing things to be for a while is actually quite a powerful tool to play with. And so, as I say, for me, it's easy, but for others, I'm sure it's a huge struggle. But just take each day as it comes. And I try to eat a healthy diet more than anything, and walk every day. And I think everything in moderation.
Yeah. So. Sounds very good. And tell us a little bit, we've got about 5 minutes left or so. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how it shaped the leader you are today. What points do you want to highlight about who shaped you, teachers, whatever? Parents. Tell us about that.
Well, unfortunately, the one thing I do remember about my education is, as a child, is that I could not wait to get away from it, and that took me into photography, actually, because photography was my passion. It was what excited me at that time of my life, and there were some, but all too few, experiences of school where I enjoyed a subject, and with the right amount of enthusiasm and encouragement from the right teacher, the right word at the right time, made the world of difference. Because the moment I was happy and engaged in something, it made the learning effortless. And I think when you're really in your own element, when you're in your own moment, that work itself, it becomes tireless. It's not a burden. It's an effortless process. And when I look back on school, I left school thinking that education wasn't for me, and I've since learned otherwise, because I'm now very much a teacher myself with the Dare to Lead team, teaching them how to sail the boat. And it is effortless when you're surrounded by people who are enthusiastic, engaged in what they're doing. They enjoy themselves, and their level of learning goes through the roof. And so I think that's the most formative part of my education, was learning that I had to enjoy doing what I did to be really good at it. And that's the vocation side. That taught me that vocations was what I had to follow.
Very, very wise. And last couple of thoughts was some of the proudest moments in your life, and then share a few of the practical leadership tips that you'd pass on to people who are not at sea, but you've learned some good lessons people have passed on to you, or you've read about them, which work in real life about getting a team together and inspiring leadership in people. So firstly, your proudest moments, and then some of your top tips.
Well, certainly one of the proudest moments for me was arriving in Newport, Rhode Island after 55 days at sea and a capsize in an incredibly small boat. And it was across the North Atlantic as well, which was, a crossing via the north of the Atlantic is the hardest of all. It's the most difficult crossing you can make. So that was a huge personal achievement for me. But in terms of achievement with a team, I'm enormously proud of what Dare to Lead have achieved, because they are sailing that boat themselves most of the time. And that was always my personal goal for them, that they would come out of this as good sailors, not just people who'd followed instructions from a skipper standing at the helm. And to see them now, there are people on the boat without naming names. There's a particular lady who has struggled and owned up in her life to having suffered from confidence issues, and really struggled with working in teams of people and feeling good about herself. Self-esteem was a big problem for her. And when you actually watch her helming a 70-foot yacht with a Code 3 sail, which is a strong wind downwind spinnaker, it's a big powerful sail at 2 o'clock in the morning in pitch black in 30 and 35 knots of wind, and she's handling it. Okay, you've changed someone's life, and it's enormously, it's humbling and it's enormously empowering to see the change in people, and how that affects a whole team. Because it's not just myself that recognises the change in that individual; the whole team saw it, and it really brings the whole team along.
Yeah, and talking about individuals, I'd have to hear more about James Bashall. So there he was, a Lieutenant General.
Yes,
with a very successful career in the army, and then he decides to go and do a leg as a crew member.
That's right.
Not in charge, not the leader at all. What did you notice about him as a member of the team that you admired? And tell me a good funny story that I can rib him about.
Well, he's already told you one funny story, hasn't he, about him thinking that he was perhaps a little bit better on the helm than he actually was, bless him. But his strength, of course, is his very personal skills, okay, his own humility, because you would not know his rank in the military if you were on board Dare to Lead. Okay, it was something you had to dig around to find out. It wasn't out there on show for the world to see. A very humble individual, a great team player. He could read people and understand who was struggling, and he had the right word for them at the right time, and that's enormously powerful as well. And to understand people without judging them and to offer them help when they might just need it the most is a great skill. And he spent a lot of time sewing as well. I'm sure you didn't know he had sewing skills, did you? I'll let him tell you about that one day.
Okay, that's great. So finally, let's end with thank you for that. And very nice of you to give James those accolades. He deserves them. What about 2 or 3 top tips? Simple, quick top tips that are really about good leadership, and you've learned them and you'd pass them on to others.
Yeah, well, so the first one, of course, is to be human above all else. Okay, and what I mean, I don't mean put on a human face. I mean, you've got to really be human, and the only way to do that is to be completely honest with people. Okay, so, and these I think I've got probably 3 things that I'd like to say about this, and that's clearly one of them. They're all interrelated, and the other one is to be honest about what you don't know and what you can't do. Okay, and that nothing will encourage people in your team to step forward and help you, knowing that they have those skill sets that you have clearly shown that you don't have. Okay, and that way you will learn and you will grow as an individual. You'll grow their respect enormously, and also as part of that process, it's also a process of stepping back and allowing other people to step forward. Sometimes when you admit that you don't know something, or you don't know how a thing is going to work out, that someone else does know, and they can step forward and give them the limelight, if you like. And of course, what I learned from my big mistake in the Southern Ocean is, just as you step back and allow others to step forward, just remember that you're perfectly there's the right time for you to step back in when the time really comes, and lead the team on again before the next occasion when you step back and allow them to work together as a team.
Yeah, great advice. Well, it's been an absolute joy. Guy Waits.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Skipper, thank you very much indeed. I wish you every success.
Thank you.
And continue to inspire and train and develop people. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.